There we go. All right. So we've got a few people. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we start, just some Zoom suggestions. So please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom throughout this webinar. We'll be doing a question and answer session after the presentation. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, we just ask that you please keep things on topic and are respectful at all times to align with the values of our group. So that's kind of the housekeeping done, and there's so much we want to share, so we'll get started. My name's Emily Cross and I'm a founding member of Voices Riverina. I'd like to begin our meeting by acknowledging that the Riverina is located on the traditional land of the Wiradjuri people, and we recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and continuing connection with the land and rivers. We also recognise the resilience, strength and pride of the Wiradjuri and First Nations communities. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations people here with us today. So it's so great to see everyone who has joined us this evening and people still arriving. So that's fantastic. It wouldn't be a launch without an audience. So a brief outline of what we'll be covering this evening. We're fortunate enough to have two brilliant guest speakers, Zali Stegel and Dennis Jinnifin. We're just waiting on Zali, who's just arrived actually. I'll just make her a panelist. There we go. How's that for timing?
Fantastic.
Brilliant timing.
Well done.
Hi, Zali.
Hello.
So
You've got a busy day.
It has been. It hasn't quite finished yet.
Yeah.
We'll hear from a number of our steering committee this evening, including Caitlin Langley, Peter Lonsdale, Fiona McPherson, Trudy Beck, Rod Studdert, Bob Montgomery, Dom Fleming, Emily Nuck, Declan Young and Andrew Regiment. So our committee members will discuss how Voices Riverina formed and the results from our kitchen table conversations over the past 12 months. We'll follow this with a Q&A session, and we expect this launch to finish in about an hour, so around 8:30 p.m. We very much see this launch of our report called Riverina Reimagined as the start of a process and certainly not the end. So I'm very excited to introduce our first guest speaker, who is Zali Stegel, the independent member for Warringah, who has seen firsthand how Voices of Warringah was able to connect and engage with voters in her electorate. So Zali has been very kind to step in for a quick introduction, but I believe she has to duck off to another Zoom. So thank you so much for your time, Zali. We understand you're a very busy person, and I'll hand over to you to kick us off.
Oh, well, thank you, Emily. And hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to join you tonight from Parliament House. And if I could start by paying my respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging. And obviously that also gives rise to some issues that we haven't resolved yet again in this Parliament yet in relation to Indigenous voice to Parliament. But anyway, from an independent movement point of view, it's exciting to see this growth in, I would say, communities awakening to their responsibility and their opportunity to participate in our democracy. It's so important. It's, I think that there is a frustration in our communities that the status quo isn't working. The status quo of looking at politics being just through the prism of two major parties opposing one another, it becomes very adversarial politics because it's always about one side pitted against the other, instead of looking at politics from a more collaborative side of how do we actually ensure best outcomes for communities. But step number one is actually engaging with communities, and communities stepping back up to the plate and owning the space. Your voice is not going to be heard unless you participate, unless you speak up. So congratulations to everyone who's participated in your conversations and been involved in giving that feedback for you to prepare this report. You know, it's really important when I sit there in Parliament and I think of it's such a privilege to be there to represent my community. And it's really important for members of Parliament to remember why they are in Parliament, that it is, you know, they are there to represent the views of their communities. They're not there on a personal agenda. They're not there on a personal ambition or whatever their career plan is. And I think communities need to take back that power and re-own that. So it's exciting to see so many voices of groups come, you know, emerge across the country. I think electorates, I know you're going to hear from Dennis, and I think electorates like Indi have set that pace. If I think back to North Sydney, where Ted Mack was an independent some years ago, and I think Warringah in 2019 really showed what engaging on the issues, having the conversations, getting people to think. Just because something has always been done this way doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. You know, the incumbents will always tell you that preserving the status quo is the only way you can go about it, because they want to preserve their power. And the best thing communities can be doing is, you know, use your voice, use your vote wisely, raise the issues that matter to you. I'm a passionate campaigner for change will only happen if you step up and participate in it. So congratulations, everyone. I don't know if you had any questions for me or you want to talk about anything more specific, but obviously I look forward to seeing the report, seeing what issues. It's really important too. I'm a city and urban electorate. You're a more regional area. We're not all the same. We need diversity in Parliament, but we also need to recognise and collaboratively work towards what are the good solutions for Australia, you know, for all our communities, and less about maybe, you know, the power play and more about the good of everyone. So congratulations on a fantastic report. I look forward to getting into the detail of it and understanding it better. And please keep putting pressure on your local MP.
Thank you so much, Sally. I think that's really set the tone and enthusiasm for this launch. We're very excited to be, really out in the community, and everything you've said really hits it on the head. So thanks, Sally. And I can let you go now. If you have to rush off, that's all fine as well. So I guess we'll introduce Dennis. So Dennis knows this part of the world very well. For 22 years, Dennis was a regional director of the innovative community of neurotrauma rehabilitation service in Albury and Wagga. And that serviced nearly all of the regions that the electorate of the Riverina covered. So Dennis is also a founding member and the former president of Voices for Indi, and has been working on the Voices for Australia project for the past 22 months. And we really couldn't think of anyone better to set the context for this launch, and we'd like to publicly thank Dennis for his support from the beginning of our journey. So he's here to talk about the Voices for project and how he kind of got to work alongside us at Voices Riverina. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emily. And thank you very much to the Voices for Riverina committee. And also thank you to the Riverina community, all the people who have participated in what it is that is described in this fantastic report. So I just wanted to say congratulations to again, as Ali did, but everything that you've done along the way to get to this point. It's just fabulous to see. And there's all these place names that are so familiar to me. When I was in that job previously, I was traveling all over the place, and you live in a good part of the world, and it's something to be really proud of and have a feeling for how well it could go into the future. And that's what I sense that report is trying to reflect. And I'm really looking forward to the way in which it brings people together to further discuss what it is that is happening, what people want, or how people can see the future unfold in a better way, and how to best interface with your representatives, federal, state, local. And what a gift that is. About the Voices for Australia movement, I'll be quite brief, but more than happy to answer questions after it too, because I know you've got a bit to go through with the report itself. So there's about 35 what I'd call formed Voices for groups in separate electorates around Australia now, and maybe another 10 where people where a group is maybe forming, or where there's been inquiry from people who are looking to see how they could embark on a strategy of that nature, of the nature that which you've done. So there's something bigger going on that's not just solely in the heads of people who are in voices committees. There's also a sense, I think, in a bit of a national psyche in a way, that people do want to see politics go better, and it's being expressed in the opportunity to get involved in some way more than just voting once every 3 years and then going back home and forgetting about it again. I think there's a sort of a sense of yearning and sense of responsibility that's starting to emerge, that we do need to link better with the way in which we're represented. And I don't mean that in a way to make it hard for somebody, but rather find ways in which people can do that job as a representative, federal, state, local, and to have a sense that there's a collaboration going on. So that's really one of the best things I think this process does. It offers an opportunity for that to occur in what I'd call a safe and respectful way, because we've had a crack at these kitchen table conversations in Indi too, and it really is a key element that often, as you know, you start talking about politics, it doesn't take too long before the dinner party goes off, and somewhere around the time the creme brulee is out, that it just turns into sort of a brawl or an awkward conversation, because it is, people see politics as something you take, as Sally indicated, a pivotal and opposing view, and therefore someone's right and someone's wrong. And the idea of a kitchen table conversation, as you know, is to go to the spaces between all of that, to find ways in which you can listen to people, respect what they've said, respect what their life story is, where they come from, and kind of capture their energy to want to participate too. Because who's to say that I'm right and they're wrong? I mean, how does that work? So I guess in a way, this is like a gift to the community, because what it is it's a statement of it's just as important for other people to be heard as it is oneself. So the idea of a conversation like this is it's just as important for people who may not be well resourced or heard in the community just generally, for us to know what's going on. We need to share this, and the kitchen table conversation and the report that you've produced pretty much reflects that process. I'm really looking forward to the conversations that you have, or presentations and conversation following this. It's really important for me to say, I think that voices groups, each group is autonomous. Whilst they might have a similar sort of name and broad intent, the thing is, each group has its own decision making, its own identity, its own governance, its own people who've made up the group, and their own strategy. So some have formed earlier than others, and some are more, progressed down that journey than others. And and there's no sort of overarching structure running the show, other than to convey, to inform people about what the possibilities might be wherever it is that groups may emerge. So some groups they've got involved in kitchen table conversations through the pandemic. There's been a lot of stuff on Zoom, as we are now still, but webinars, town hall meetings that are virtual. But for myself, I just can't help it. The best way to do is, if I can, is get out on the road and meet people, and meet people in their own space. And I think really through the pandemic, this has been the second best option, is to do a lot of this stuff from a distance. And good on you for weathering that storm of, that need to find some other ways to reach such a huge region. I know it's not as big as all the biggest, but it's up there. And so you've done a great job to reach across the region. And I guess you'll be continuing to do that with subsequent conversations too. So there's no really right or wrong way to do this, but in some places an independent has stood, but sometimes, and with a support of a community group, sometimes they stand without the support of a community group. They just might stand as a self-appointed one. And all I can say is that the method of engagement and the depth of engagement, what's being created by our voices a project like this is it creates opportunities for people to really reach deeper into the community. So I reckon that's how a community can be best represented, is through that process of engagement and connection and grassroots community up approach to politics. So I wanted to finish just to say again, once again, thank you so much for what you've done, the leadership and inspiration that you've created, and travel well. And looking forward to listening to the rest of the presentations tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
Yeah, the past 12 months has seen a lot of work done by the Voices groups and a lot of kitchen tables. So the conversations have been flowing, I think. So a lot of work's been done, including by Voices Riverina. So I think we'll move on to that now, and we'll talk about who we are and what we've accomplished. So I'm going to hand over to Caitlin, who's going to give an introduction to Voices Riverina, who we are, and just as importantly, who we're not.
Thanks, Emily. My name's Caitlin Langley. I'm a founding member of Voices for Riverina, and I will be taking us through who we are and how we came together. So we were established by a group of local Riverina residents. We sort of shared a sense of not feeling well represented, and many lamented the inaccessibility of politics. And we all wanted to see greater accountability of our elected. Initially, we got together over a shared disillusionment with politics, but most importantly, we wanted to find a way to transcend apathy. As a group, we discussed how we could address these concerns without being antagonistic and have a positive impact. We wanted to know what the consensus was across our electorate in the hopes of better understanding what people loved about the Riverina, as well as their hopes for the future, and start a positive conversation. So we're a grassroots community group. We're not associated with any organizations, political parties, or independent candidates. We are a not-for-profit incorporated group, and we are funded by the donations from our members. Our vision, so we are wanting to encourage and empower participatory democracy across the Riverina electorate. We want to strive for a unified Riverina family and a sense of pride for our community, as this sense of community fosters a sense of genuine connection. We want to serve as a catalyst for action and improve the standards for modern and effective and innovative representation within the Riverina electorate. Our values that we agreed on as a group: courage to support people to stand up for what they believe, diversity to welcome people from all walks of life, inclusivity. We are a non-partisan group, and we encourage participation from everyone. It's a really important thing that we wanted to get, to be able to have as part of a group. Integrity. We thought it was really important to embody ethical, honest, and transparent behavior and make decisions on the best available evidence. And of course, number 5, respect. All values and all views, we want to give due regard and listen to everyone, because only when everyone feels, when you feel listened to, do you feel like you're going to be able to be a part of a community. I sincerely appreciate everyone's time in listening to my contribution, and it gives me great pleasure to now hand over to Pete.
Thank you, Caitlin. Peter Lonsdale is my name, and I am one of the founding members of Voices for Riverina. Just to demonstrate the community really is responsible for what happens with democracy within their community. I just wanted to outline that I'm a father, a husband. I care for my mother, who's elderly. I'm a small business owner, and just an ordinary person who's lived in this electorate all of my life. And I would like to see a better democracy within our community. The fabric of democracy is reliant on communication, and listening is an important component of communication. The federal seat of Riverina is 20% bigger than Switzerland. It encompasses the metropolis of Wagga, the orchards of Young, the cropping farms of West Wyalong, livestock farming in Coolac, and this demonstrates the diversity and different needs within our community and across this electorate, emphasising the importance for our elected representatives to ensure that they are listening to their constituents. Voices for Riverina facilitated kitchen table conversations where a facilitator and scribe worked towards producing our Riverina Reimagined report. Kitchen table conversations, which you heard Dennis mention a little bit earlier, gave participants throughout the electorate the opportunity to be heard in an anonymous, managed and safe environment where there are no right or wrong answers to their views. Kitchen table conversations for this report were conducted throughout the electorate, and future conversations will be a powerful tool for the community to promote a better democracy. Participants aged between 17 and 75 gave their feedback on a range of questions based on living in the electorate of Riverina, political engagement and representation, key issues and concerns, looking forward, and future improvements they would like to see where they live. The participants of the kitchen table conversations in this report had various reasons for attending, with consensus from them, regardless of their political preference, being that they were not being heard by their elected representatives. The participants expressed in this report an awakening to the power of people stepping up through grassroots community groups, dissatisfaction with current political systems, specific issues not being addressed, in particular where they live in rural Australia, and most importantly, a desire to see political representation improved. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Fiona McPherson to discuss our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Hello, my name is Fiona McPherson, and it gives me enormous pleasure to share with you tonight a summary of the key findings from our kitchen table conversations held during the last year. The findings in our report will likely not surprise many of you, but it's our aim that these findings act as a catalyst for action and are taken seriously by those that represent us here in the Riverina. We certainly don't intend our report to be a final resting place, but rather a springboard from which we can now act and gather momentum. So here it is, our report, which we've called Riverina Reimagined. And the content of this report comes directly from the people we spoke with. So if it wasn't said, it didn't get into the report. And you'll be able to download a copy of the report from our website. The creation of this report was the result of hundreds of hours of work by many people. Every single person played a vital part. So whether you travelled up and down the electorate to facilitate or scribe at KTCs, or were kind enough to host a conversation, or indeed you were one of the actual participants who turned up looking to have a voice, we thank you. It's a great example of what can be achieved when members of our community come together for a common goal and a vision as shared by Caitlin. So having a background in market research, it was my role to analyse the 32 focus groups. With so much qualitative data, we needed a very structured and methodical way of collecting all the information. And to that end, all the responses were analysed using an overview grid, which is basically an Excel spreadsheet where all the findings were captured. Themes were identified within each KTC, and then recurring themes were grouped together. In some instances, umbrella themes were then created to help in the readability and actionability of this report. Anonymous quotes were also captured to personalise and bring to life our research findings. So I'm now going to share with you an overview from the first half of our report and then I'll hand over to Trudy to take us through the remaining part of our research findings. So the first question we asked our participants came about from our desire to have a strong Riverina federal electorate community. Participants voiced a wide range of responses as to what makes a strong community, which was not surprising given that our KTCs were conducted in both rural and urban locations, in small towns and larger cities, and all across the electorate. Participants commented that communities are constantly changing and that stronger communities are more prevalent in smaller rural regions. Wagga's overall community, for example, was not necessarily seen as strong or cohesive, and this was mainly attributed to its size. However, it is recognised that there exists community within communities, and for example, sports clubs or multicultural organisations were mentioned here. So the four most common responses for what makes a strong community, you can see here in the slide, were connection. So people feel a sense of belonging and acceptance, where people look out for others, they feel safe and they feel secure. There's an acknowledgement that we all have a role in creating a strong community, and to a certain extent, we need to build our own. Opportunities to contribute and share experiences make for a strong community if there are events and opportunities where people can get involved and share these experiences, such as live events like music and art festivals, going to the theatre, local markets, volunteering, etc. And then inspiring leadership also had a strong mention. So there was recognition that leaders and councils have a role to play in helping to develop and foster community connection, whether that be availability, infrastructure, or investment. There was concern, however, and it's important to mention that for some people, the demise of rural communities or the rural drain and the suffering of small towns in our region is a key issue, and there'll be more on this later. We love living in the Riverina, and we wanted to know why others do too, to know what's important to them. So the next question participants were asked is, what are the best things about living in the Riverina? There is a real sense of regional pride amongst Riverina residents, and at every KTC, the lifestyle, community spirit, and our proximity to the natural environment was considered highly attractive to why people live in our region. So lifestyle included ease of travel, cost of living, a great place to bring up families, diverse range of activities, something for everyone, diversity of backgrounds and cultures, and the list was very extensive. And community spirit, as we saw earlier, a welcoming, supportive and genuine community. Proximity to the natural environment was a significant contributor to the lifestyle and the feel of where people live. Having the opportunity to get out and relax in nature has never been more appealing. And particular mentions included Lachlan and Murrumbidgee rivers, our native wildlife and bird life, the Wiradjuri Reserve here in Wagga, and many other aspects. Again, there is a concern, and it is important to mention that for some people, particularly in the northern part of our electorate, that being part of the Riverina is a misnomer. Not only have they been shunted into different electorates for decades, they also feel very distant from Wagga. And we feel that this needs to be addressed. A united electorate with a strong identity is key in engaging its residents to instill a together we can approach. And as a starter for 10, we've had a map created which visually shows not only how unique our electorate is, but how much our electorate has to offer. So this is our map, and I think you'll agree that it's a great representation of our region. And I hope it makes our region feel connected and proud of being part of the wider Riverina family. So following on from questions about living in the Riverina, we next asked our participants about political engagement and representation. Did they feel they have an adequate voice in the way that they are represented? And the overall response to this question was no. This was felt strongest towards local and federal levels of government, with more positive feelings felt at a state level. From the responses, we created a scale to visually depict 5 levels of engagement as we saw it within our KTCs. I'm sure you can identify which of the 5 levels you'd put yourself at, or perhaps people you know. I'm just going to talk us through the 5 levels here. So we'll start at the top. So a general apathy towards politics and its role in everyday life. A real disconnect between people, particularly young people, and politics and political representation. And if you recall what Zali said earlier this evening, she talked about communities' appetite and awakening really to being engaged and taking an interest in politics is very important going forward. So level 2, it's hard to know who to go to or how to access our representative and have their voice heard. So people need more information on who to consult and what the actual process is. What can they expect? So the mustard colour, level 3, a sense of there being no point. I won't be listened to, especially as an individual, and that it takes more than one person to have influence. And the fact that our electorate is a safe seat makes people feel overlooked. So for those who have stuck their head above the political parapet, there's a bit of a sense of being disillusioned. They've not had a very positive experience. They've either received a stock standard response and felt like that they were treated like a number and not as an individual, or they hadn't received a response at all. So they were very much left with a feeling of, why did I bother? And then the positive experience, there were some people, albeit not many in our KTCs, who had felt heard, especially at a state level, or if they had already had to deal with council and understood the process. It would be great to conduct a quantitative survey to get some numbers behind how many people fall into each of these 5 levels and tailor communication and engagement messages to each of these groups of people. Having a benchmark measure would enable progress and improvement to be tracked over time. Imagine a community satisfaction survey collecting feedback about the performance of our representative. And talking about representatives, we wanted to know what people consider to be the most important and desired attributes of a political representative. There was a large number of responses that can be broadly divided into 2 categories. So the values we want our representatives to embody and the actions our representatives should take whilst representing us. So in terms of personal qualities, this captured political accountability, integrity, transparency, and actually a very long list of attributes. Getting the right person to start with was seen as vital to make a strong relationship between people and the elected representatives. There's talk of genuine representation, someone who really represented the people in the community within our electorate rather than their party. Their ability to listen and connect with their constituents. That decision-making is evidence-based and not opinion-based leadership. That there is long-term big picture and innovative vision for our electorate. Be a proactive, effective and visible communicator. So those were what makes for a good political representative. We saw earlier from our engagement scale that had 5 levels that many participants felt disconnected from politics or that they had no voice. And so asking for practical ideas and suggestions to improve community engagement and interest in democracy and politics was a critical follow-up question. And as you can see here, the number one suggestion was accessible politics. And accessibility was described in two broad terms. So physical presence of elected members in their communities, and also strategies to make politics more engaging and relatable by building upon political literacy, encouraging and empowering people to understand how politics affects them and how it fits into their community and their life. We've got some of the practical physical suggestions listed here, such as regular meetings within each of the LGAs, sort of Zoom meetings, recordings, live streaming, etc. Certainly there was a request for more dialogue and not just monologue. That was seen as very important. Ability to be able to meet the representative and have a one-to-one conversation, more community discussion and letting people have a voice. Increasing the scale of voices for Riverina. That was great to have that fed into the KTCs, and then more political discussion in schools. So I'm now going to hand you over to Trudy. He will take us through the remaining part of the research findings.
Hi everyone. I'm Trudy. I live on the edge of Wagga on beautiful Wiradjuri country. I'm very excited to be here this evening, and I'm just checking that you can hear me. Can you wave, Fee, if you can hear me? Can you go to the next slide, please? So I loved doing kitchen tables. They were one of my favorite part of this whole process, and I was really excited to meet a broad range of people from a very broad range of backgrounds, most of whom I'd never met before, and to hear their concerns. And I think actually the things that people were concerned about really gave me some sense of hope and positivity for the future of what the Riverina could be if some of these findings were able to be translated into action through good representation at all levels of the community. So I look at the top 20 concerns and really put that down into a few key areas. The first one was environmental protection and sustainability, and leading in from this is also climate change strategy, action and policy. I group those together because I think in lots of people's minds, those two things stand together, as good environmental stewardship automatically has positive climate change ramifications. Beyond that, I think it also looked at the strength of community sentiment to look towards protecting and promoting opportunities for those in our community who are marginalised or vulnerable, particularly Indigenous inequality issues, refugee and migrant support. Our region has been a major migrant resettlement area prior to COVID, and I think that our region has also seen great benefits from that, and with that has come community sentiment to support those people to assimilate in a positive way into our community. Issues around crime, issues around aged care and homelessness, all those people who historically within traditional political realms don't have strong voices. So it was great to hear that within the KTCs we had really strong social issues dominating a lot of the top concerns. Beyond that, as Fiona and Caitlin have mentioned previously, was the concerns about the future focus and sustainability of our regional communities, and particularly looking at what's seen as the economic youth and brain drain from our rural communities that happens more in the smaller farming communities, where we see that in some of the younger aged interviewees that we were lucky enough to meet with, they talked about how they felt that there was pressure to leave their community if they wanted to continue with education or job opportunities where there may not have been areas they were interested in their local community. So how can we try to encourage those kinds of really vibrant and energetic young people to feel that they have a future within our region? And then always mental health is a key area of concern, and that's been a massive issue during COVID, which we have all communities have had front and foremost, given that the accessibility of mental health services are very difficult to access in a timely way in most areas in our region. I think the thing that was interesting, that of the top 20 concerns, almost all of these issues had potential to have changes implemented at all 3 levels of government. So I really enjoyed that this was not just a federally focused or a locally focused list of issues, that each of the 3 levels of government have a really legitimate role to play in seeing some of these areas of concern addressed. Of the top 5, the issues around these were really pervasive through all areas of the report. So again, protecting our natural environment is something that's important, I think, to both the urban dwellers and the rural dwellers within our KTCs. Issues that were of key concern to people was the idea that there seems to be a lacking of a national or even a regional approach to agriculture and vision going forward, natural resource management, water availability, security and ownership. Water availability has been a very relevant issue, and ownership a very relevant issue within our electorate, and being that we border, or we're on the Murrumbidgee, but we're not very far from the Murray, and we have obviously the Lachlan in the northern part of our electorate, our region really depends on the adequate foresight and management of the river for success of communities that enjoy all the leisure activities on the river, but also those who rely on it for livelihood. So this was seen as one of the key issues, and I think that going forward that would be something that Voices for Riverina would continue to advocate for. Future focus planning. I think one of the things that was very a big issue that recurrently was brought up by people was that they felt that the regions have a lot to offer in terms of, and COVID has kind of forced this on us in some ways, where we see that there are flaws to having huge amounts of people centralized in one area, and when you lock an area down, you find that the flaws are even more exaggerated. So I guess that with long-term foresight for what the regions have to offer, there's so much possibility for providing our regions with infrastructure and with the telecommunications and overall approaches to the structure of how regions can absorb more people from the cities as time goes forward. Telecommunications was a huge one, and I will never forget early on in doing the kitchen tables that we had a specific kitchen table group of teenagers who were talking about the challenges of remote learning with COVID, and that they were very frustrated because they said it was all well and good for the New South Wales Department of Education to say that they had to home learn, but a huge number of the students that were sitting in that kitchen table during remote home learning hadn't been able to do so because their area wasn't serviced by internet that would allow them to dial in. So I think that we have to be able to acknowledge that long-term planning and infrastructure stands to benefit everyone in our electorate across all age ranges. Stronger action on climate change was one of the reasons why I initially felt disenfranchised and disempowered through the political landscape, but I was pleased to see that through active listening and not trying to persuade conversations, that there's actually many other people who also hold this sentiment. I think when we go back to what the core values of our group are, one of them being something that most of us feel very strongly about, which is evidence-based policy, it has been very difficult for many people across the electorate to see the devastating effects of droughts in the last few years being taken out on their communities, and knowing that with meaningful action and a roadmap towards a national, a regional and a local policy on climate change, that we do have the power to both change the narrative around what climate change means for our region, but also to be part of the solution. And many people that attended our kitchen tables were very positive about the possibility of regions like the Riverina being proactive and interactive and positive with federal government and local government planning to be part of the long-term solution for climate change. Changes to the political system was another interesting one that's been I guess even more topical in the last 12 months. At federal level, we've seen the role of independents in trying to push for a federal ICAC, and it'll be interesting to see if that changes the dialogue and encourages more people, if we were to hold more kitchen tables, to see that as an issue. But certainly going back to what makes a good representative and the questions that we asked around that, changes to the political system were a very strongly held sentiment for people that we spoke to, in terms of transparency. Like, if a politician makes a promise in an election bid, is there any accountability to that promise being seen through? Integrity, we've seen that in our own electorate. We've made front page news over recent months with the investigations into New South Wales political integrity. Again, accountability about making promises and keeping them. And long-term vision was something that was repeatedly brought up, is that we want to see that we can understand that governments have views beyond the current term of government, and that the planning will benefit not just those in government now and not just those in business now, but students coming through. Teenagers felt that that the plans that were being made in the country didn't seem to take into account their visions for the future. And a decentralisation of government to the regions, which is in keeping with decentralisation of and building of infrastructure within our region. Indigenous inequality, as mentioned before, was a topical issue. The Riverina is home to a large percentage of residents who identify as Indigenous. And so the issues relating to the rights and equality for First Nations people are also issues that in our region we should care about. There was recurrent reference to investigations that have been done into the deaths in custody, where actions that should have been taken as a result of recommendations to from those reports haven't been carried out. And so that really fed into what I mentioned earlier, which was that within the electorate there is a strong sentiment for proactive approach towards those who are seen as marginalised and disenfranchised. One of my favourite parts of the KTCs was listening to what people could see as what visions they would like to see brought to life in the coming decade in their electorate or in their backyard. I think that a pervasive theme of all aspects of the kitchen tables was how much of a connection residents of the Riverina feel with their natural environment. And I think that anyone who lives in the Riverina understands why that is. Like, you don't live here for the lights and the smells and the sounds of the big city. You live here because you step out of your front door and you're greeted with the sounds and sights of wild birds along the river, or of creeping up floodwaters, as it might be at the moment. So I think that overall people felt that environmental guardianship was a key priority issue for all levels of government, from local government planning of how our regions expand and how we balance the needs of business and of the economy with those of the environment, through to state and federal government, where they have obvious obligations in regards to trying to create stewardship that puts us all towards a common goal. Looking after our youth, I think that we've mentioned this in various different ways throughout the report, that rural areas have really suffered a drain of, I think traditionally it's sometimes been called a brain drain. I don't like to say that, because I think we have a lot to offer, and within our kitchen tables, references to CSU and pride of those in the Riverina about the role of CSU. We definitely have a lot to offer in terms of maintaining our own brains, but definitely looking after our youth, so that if they do choose to stay within the regions, that they feel like there's access to services that they require, from mental health that some of our young respondents talked about, and access to good services, through to vocational education and training, right through to university training, and then being able to find a job that you found both financially and emotionally fulfilling at the end of that process. People talked about wanting a regional and rural vision, which I feel is an area that groups like Voices for Riverina and Voices for Indi, Voices for Hume can help to contribute to, but also that they hoped that with increased participation in democracy, that average people could help to contribute to these visions. Real action on climate change, which was a pervasive issue again, which is basically in the news every day, and certainly was an issue that was repeatedly brought up during our KTCs. And political accountability, who knows when or where we will see that. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand over to Rod.
Hello. So what do we do next? Well, we should point out that at this point, we've been focused on getting community consultation and reporting back on community concerns. And you've just heard Trudy and Fiona and Caitlin talk about that. So now our focus changes and we need to get this report into the public domain and make it a topic for discussion. We have done and are doing media discussions and interviews to publicise the report, and that must continue so that people are aware that they can have a voice and that they can be heard, and that hopefully it will connect not just to the community only, but to those who represent us. Kitchen table conversations will continue, and they're a very good way for people to have a direct voice in a small group where they can feel they can be heard. But we'd also like to extend that to bigger groups, and as we approach the coming election in early 2022, that will start to become a focus. As you've just heard from Trudy and others, involving youth, making sure that youth doesn't feel that it's disengaged from the political process, and making sure that the Riverina has a life and institutions that youth can access is highly important. And we'd also like to remind everybody that the Riverina is growing. It's not a one-dimensional electorate. It's not a caricature of a rural electorate. It's growing more connected. It's growing more diverse. It's having people come in from within Australia and overseas, and that process won't stop. It will continue. And so we want to reflect that mentality in this group. We also want to remember that youth voices won't always be youth voices. They're the coming mainstream, of course, and their concerns and that 10-year outlook is highly important. In terms of coming up to the federal election, however, we'd like to point out that we've invited all sitting members to attend this group. We understand that's 3 members from state parliament and 1 member from federal parliament. We do understand that this is a sitting week in parliament. We know that Zali was very busy and did make 10 minutes for us, so we were very grateful. However, we've also asked to meet with all members of parliament, and so that we can present our report, discuss it, and most particularly get a response from them. And those invitations, as I understand it, are sitting there at the moment. We've also contacted all LGA representatives. There are 14 LGAs in this area, and we know we've got coming elections, so it's a very large number of candidates. Nevertheless, we are asking them to engage with our report, and the more people who pressure them, the more they will respond. With the coming federal election, it's important that Voices for Riverina advocates for the concerns that we see in this report. And that means conducting meetings, as I referred to earlier, discussing, debating, and publicising the response of how politicians react to our report. This will specifically include a community forum where we will invite elected representatives and those who participated in kitchen table conversations to attend, and sitting members will be asked their response to the report. In order to achieve this, it also means growing the group. Politicians will respond to what they see as significant numbers, so the more people who get involved, the more response we'll get. It's also been pointed out within the group that if the Voices for Riverina report was to be acted on by our political representatives, then we would have achieved a large section of our purpose. However, the experience of voices groups in other electorates has been that politicians tend not to respond unless they feel they have to, and that they tend to take their electorates for granted if they're in safe seats. That's why voices groups have led to independent candidates. We're not endorsing any candidate, but we're pointing out that it does happen in voices groups. And that at the end of the last term of Parliament, those independent candidates held the balance of power, and that led to some positive outcomes in the last federal Parliament. In the coming election, it appears that there are going to be more voices, active groups active in more electorates, and that these will now in some electorates become active influencers of electoral outcomes. Therefore, we're very happy that a greater community involvement can lead to a focus not on party political activities or private ambitions, but on candidates representing the concerns of their electorates. If we're to achieve all of that, then getting involved is highly important. The more of us who are involved, the more our elected representatives will take notice of us. For this group, you could start by reading our report. It's on our website. You've just seen a presentation for it, and so please have a look at it. There will also be opportunities to have your say, so there'll be more kitchen table conversations and larger meetings as we approach the coming election. A key focus for Voices for Riverina is to make our politicians more accessible. We're trying to do that, but any member of the electorate can also do that. Accessibility is highly important, and you can contact your local members, federal, state, and local. You can email their electoral office, you can ring them. They will respond if they think there are numbers behind these inquiries. They will respond if they think that there is a community concern and this has happened and we can do it. You can also join Voices for Riverina. If politicians respond to pressure, then they'll pay attention to us if they see our numbers are growing. You can visit our website, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can even make a donation. None of us have any more money than anybody else in this electorate have, and so any finances are welcome. Just remember that democracy is owned by those people who turn up. So if you turn up, you get a say. Thank you, and thanks back to Emily.
Thanks, Rod. So I'll finish that presentation there. So now we can move on to a Q&A session, and I'll just open up the Q&A box. So if you have any thoughts on what you've just listened to, any comments, pop them into the Q&A box and we'll try and get through as many as we can. I realize it's 8:30, so we'll try and do as many as we can. So let's see what we've got. So Melina has asked how many Indigenous people were represented in the kitchen conversations. So I can throw that one to Fiona, probably would be great to answer that one.
Thanks for asking that question, Melina. I was hoping that someone would bring that up. To be honest, we haven't spoken to anyone that identified as Indigenous. That certainly wasn't through lack of trying, but it's certainly going forward the two areas that we would like to receive more engagement with in our KTCs are our Indigenous fellow community members and also more youth throughout our electorate. So as we have said all the way through, that this is very much the start of a process, and we intend to continue gathering information back from all sectors of our electorate. So we recognise that that is an area that we want to cover. So thank you for the question.
Thanks, Fee. So we've got one from Donna. V4R works on all three levels of government. I'm thinking that's a question rather than a comment. So I might throw that one to Andrew. Andrew, are you able to answer that question? Oh, you're muted there, Andrew. Just unmute.
Sorry, hopefully you can hear me now. We've chosen the Voices for Riverina because the Riverina electorate has a clear outline, but we're very, very interested in being involved in the other two levels of government, which is local council. And at a lot of our kitchen tables, for example, in Cootamundra, we spoke a lot about concerns related to local government. And at a state level, we also have a great interest, and hopefully these will build over time as we have greater more kitchen table conversations, and we can discuss problems that are occurring in state electorates, which obviously differ from the Riverina electorate, and also at council levels. So it's a democracy at all levels. So that's the answer.
Thanks. Andrew? So just looking good, a couple more coming in. So we've got Kathy McGowan's here. Hi, Kathy. Can you let us know how many people have tuned in? I think it was 58. I saw before, about 50 attendees, which is great. So we've got another question from Margot. Someone called Penny, I think, phoned into Life Matters to say that there was a group standing as an independent. Is this correct? And if so, would you consider endorsing a quality independent candidate? Trudy, if you'd like to answer that one.
Thanks, Em. So I think that as a founding member of this group, I guess my personal motivation going into this was that I felt disengaged because of the lack of positive, I guess, interactions I'd had with certain people at certain levels of government, but a belief that overall, democracy may be a flawed system, but it's the best system that we have. And I guess my interest, and I think most of the founding members' interest in this group was, I guess, to have really positive and constructive conversations about politics and leave the door open to what may come and what may be from that point. I think that although there's a number of voices for or voices of groups across Australia that have signalled an intention to either help recruit or support or endorse an independent candidate, our focus has been that all of the founding members essentially believed in the structure of the INDI model, and INDI's model really sat around being relatively taking a back seat to the process of selecting and endorsing an independent, and really just being about essentially being a listening group and running focus groups and trying to get true, clear, non-partisan sentiments from the community that they hoped would then be fed back to political representatives. So I think given where we are now, our current aims would be to try to work with those who have been brave enough to put their names forward and are sitting members of parliament, and try to get them to take on board some of the messages that we have put forward in this report. And I can't say what will happen over the next 3 years and where the level of energy and interest of this group will go. But I think at the moment, our focus is really about delivering the community a really solid, well-researched and as unbiased as possible report that current members of parliament or members of local government or state government can take from that the messages that they think are useful in their electorate.
Thanks, Trudy. A couple more have just popped up. So we've got one from Keith here. I might throw this one to Caitlin. I didn't hear anything about the lack of women in all levels of government. Oh, that was from Jan, sorry. Oh, I think you're on mute there, Caitlin. There we go.
Sorry about that. Yes, hi, Jan, and hi, Keith. Yes, look, I think that it was a very common lamentation to have people that we spoke to at the kitchen table conversations talk about diversification in what we're seeing in our electorate, and well, that was definitely something that was covered off, and I think it's sort of broadly acknowledged as being something that would be good to have in future candidates, reflected in the diversity of our community, which I think everyone unanimously that we spoke to in all of these kitchen table conversations, or at least the ones that I was involved with, it's something that people in the Riverina are so proud of. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think everyone agrees that it would benefit everyone to have a better reflection of the diversity that we have in our community. That was definitely something that was a very strongly reflected. So yeah, good point though. Very good observation.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go for it, Faye.
Okay. Hi, Jan. Certainly attendees wanted to see more women represented in all aspects. Parliament, absolutely better gender balance within Parliament and more women on boards. There was also concern around the lack of access to reproductive and abortion healthcare services in the Riverina, concerns for domestic violence, and as well as poverty amongst older women. So certainly a lot of women rights and gender equality issues came through in our report and in our KTC. So I hope that answers your question.
Fee, while you're there, we've got another one because you analysed a lot of the reports. So Gabrielle's asked, did you get a sense that the KTC participants were from a range of voting backgrounds, or more bluntly, most of those engaged in KTC's non-coalition voters, as is often the assumption?
I think we strived extremely hard to have a broad range of people attend the KTCs. I know that Caitlin spent some time ensuring that we had people that represented all aspects of the political spectrum. And I think that's why we've worked so hard to ensure that Voices for Riverina is seen as impartial, and really we are the voice of the voter. And that is what we keep focusing on. There is no point our group being pigeonholed into a certain part of the political spectrum, because that is all the types of people that we would have attend our groups, and that's not a very broad-based demographic to analyse for me and for the rest of the group going forward. So Caitlin, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that you've just outlined a few really good points, Fiona, which was that it was a pretty ubiquitous theme of a lot of the discussion that we had about the levels of domestic violence that we have in our community. And that was a concern that a lot of people mentioned, from the ones that I was involved with anyway. But to the point of that Gabrielle Chen was saying about getting diversity across the political spectrum, we did try really hard to make sure that we were getting a good cross section across different groups of people. So, going out to smaller country towns and, trying to engage with people that were outside of our political or personal sort of circles. So I tried to engage with everyone and ask people that might know someone that knows someone to come along to a kitchen table. So I think the approach that we really tried to do in a lot of these kitchen tables was, can you bring a friend? Because when people brought a friend along, then it was somebody who had no idea what they were coming in for. And so they might not be as politically engaged. And that's a really good thing, because it meant, they might not be someone who is your typical, person that is interested in politics and really is, interested in talking about it. But, ultimately, I think I can, I don't know what everyone else's experience were, but those were the people that gave really great insight. And I think from what I saw, we had more in common than not, which was really interesting. Does that answer your question?
I think that answers it, yeah. And seeing as we're going for time, we might do just one more question. I know there's a couple here, but I might throw this one to Pete. So what does success look like for the group? How will momentum be continued post upcoming federal election?
Well, one of the ways that I think success can be measured is in the number of candidates that we might see when we go to vote. One of the issues that we've seen in this electorate, due mainly to its size, is the lack of candidates, and hence the lack of candidates really demonstrates a lack of democracy. So, if these types of community groups can build pathways for people to come forward, the size of the electorate makes it financially a large impost on a person. And the community, if they get together and work together to develop pathways and avenues where people can come forward who mightn't have thought they had an opportunity before due to their financial status, for example, to build a campaign, and they might be fantastic at the job. I mean, it might be that we're really looking to have the ability to be able to go to an election where you can vote for someone whose views align with yours, and that you're not just voting for someone because the other people's views don't align with yours. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it's a nice one to end. So I think we'll wrap things up now. We encourage anyone who's from the Riverina electorate, who's interested in what they've heard tonight, to head to our website after this webinar and have a look at the report. There's also an option to become a member to stay up to date with everything Voices for Riverina. This meeting's also being recorded, so if you know of anyone who wanted to attend but couldn't, it should be available. Hopefully it'll go on our website and social media sites. Or if you just want to watch it again, that's fine as well. So we're also looking for enthusiastic community volunteers who align with our values and who would like to help us meet our goals. Voices for Riverina's motto is "Together we can," and we'd be very excited for you to join us for our journey ahead. I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in our launch, including our guest speakers, Zali and Dennis. Thank you to all the KTC kitchen table conversation participants and hosts who made tonight possible, really. And we sincerely thank you, our audience, for attending and listening. We hope you have an excellent evening, and we look forward to seeing you at future Voices for Riverina events. So have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.